Welcome to Cascadia Daily News. Today we're here with State Representative Alicia, the Democratic candidate running for re-election in the 42nd District, Position 1. With me are Judd, CDN's executive editor, and reporter Charlotte Alden, who's covering this race. Ron and Cynthia Pope, the CDN publisher, are the voting members of the CDN editorial board. So I haven't met a candidate yet who thinks that 150 words are enough to sufficiently answer a question, which is what we ask people to do for this. And thank you for keeping your answers to 150 words. But this is a chance, as Ron says, to talk some more about that. One topic that consistently ranks high with our readers is housing. And the first question is, what would you do about the housing crisis, not just the lack of stock, but the lack of average and middle class affordability and predatory investors and landlords. And in your answer, you spoke of passing the missing middle bill. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the missing middle bill and how that would help assuage the housing crisis.
So when we talk about housing, it is it is complicated. And it's a complex issue. So I never want to look at it from just one approach. We really are going to continue to do work in multiple ways at the same time because homelessness and people are complex. We don't have one single solution because we don't have one single type of person. We need to do all of those things at the same time. At the center of all of it, we know that we continue to have a shortage of stock. We cannot talk about the housing problem without understanding at its very core, there are more people than housing available. And that doesn't work for markets and it doesn't work for people. So we know that we're going to continue to do smart investments in increasing and making it easier to build that housing stock. But there are also many other things that we have to do that target particular challenges. In addition, so I never want to think about it as if it were a simple problem that we're going to do one thing or another. We do layers and layers of really, I guess I'm a social worker, so I think about interventions. For example, I think about homelessness and all the different faces that we have of homelessness. We have many children, last count over 600, who are living in cars. That's a complicated housing issue. Do we need stock? Absolutely. If we don't have enough stock, we don't have housing available, but we also need short-term solutions. So that's why I got some additional investment for Whatcom County's kids who are living in cars so that at least while they're waiting on these long wait lists for housing, that they have some shelter to stay in. They can stay safely in a hotel and that sort of thing.
Another important issue to our readers, and it always has been education. This question was about bringing fair and equitable funding to all public school districts in Washington. And in your answer, you noted that this current school funding system is not working, and you cited a number of bills that you introduced to change that. One that really caught my eye was to address mental health for our students. And since COVID, this has certainly been an issue, and we're finding that students are having a hard time adjusting. What specifically can you do to help improve the mental health of our students?
Thank you for asking about mental health, because truly for our youth, it's at the core of what is holding them back from thriving the way that we want them to. The fact of the matter is kids can't learn when their brains are on fire. So we think about all of the different ways. You mentioned housing. It's a perfect example. Just imagine that you're a kid getting ready for your school day and you don't know if the doors are going to be locked when you get home because you hear the adults talking about, murmurs of, will we have the apartment or will we be kicked out by the end of the month or by the beginning of the month? Those kids can't go in and learn ABCs, 1, 2, 3s because they're worried about survival. And we just know that how brains work, that shuts down the learning part. So we just can't ignore the kind of crises that our children are in. We also are in the middle of a fentanyl crisis. We have substance abuse rates with our youth higher than we've ever seen before. And we have learning gaps, unaddressed or underaddressed challenges with meeting IEP needs. All of these things are hungry kids. Don't forget hungry kids all at the same time. Can you imagine being a child and having your tummy rumble and not knowing when you're going to be able to eat your next meal and not knowing that you're going to be able to actually afford lunch when you go into the lunchroom when it finally comes? Of course they can't learn. So these complexities are being presented to our educators and to those folks as the kids walk through the door. I think about it like they just walk through those front doors with a backpack full of stress. And, we've got to have a comprehensive solution to that. Teachers themselves really want to help with this, but they also have large class sizes and they need further training, or they need what they really are asking for, and I agree, is they need more folks in the building who are specialists in this. So this is a new way of doing things, but it's really the only way that we know is going to be effective in the long term for giving the opportunity to these kids to be successful as adults and to be our next generation of humans in the world, but also our workforce.
Sticking with education for a minute, we spoke about clearly the needs for improving mental health among students. I'm thinking also about students' physical health, and just this, in the last few days, we had yet another school shooting in Georgia. Is there anything more the legislature can do to protect students in their classrooms?
I mean,
from gun violence?
Right? This is completely unacceptable. I myself, as a mother, kiss my children every single day, drop them off, and worry and pray, and that is not enough. We have to continue doing reasonable, common sense gun legislation. We have started to do some of that. We've passed some laws, but we're going to have to continue to look at what we can do to make sure that these guns are not in the hands of the people who are shooting students in school. I think there are other things that we can do as well, but I don't think it's unrelated to the mental health issue we just talked about. We know that two things have to happen. When we know that there is a threat, we need to understand it. We need to recognize it, assess it. We have to remove the guns. We have to ensure that those guns don't come in the building. And we also have to treat those mental health issues with the youth. So both things at the same time. We have our work cut out for us.
Another issue that's always on readers' minds is infrastructure. You just have to drive in traffic around here to see what the issues are. Do you think we're making enough investments in infrastructure? What more is needed to improve the infrastructure in Whatcom County, well, in the 42nd District?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but the road quality is frustrating for me. It's really taken a toll on my car. And as a steward, I guess, of our tax money, it's been a long concern of mine that when we don't take care of our roads up front, it gets much more expensive in the long run. So I do think that is an area that we need to continue improving on. I know that we have spent a lot of efforts in really building out a light rail. It's been expensive, and that's great. But it's time for us out in the outlying areas to make sure that we've got the infrastructure we need as well. We need to ensure that our roads and bridges are safe and that we're not wasting money in the long run when we really should be doing some of this prevention work now. And I know our cities and our counties are relying on us to deliver in that way. So I'll continue to work on that as well.
Ron, you have some questions I believe you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I was interested in your, I'm with you on infrastructure, by the way. Well, actually, let me ask a quick follow-up on that. I've talked to people at State DOT about infrastructure needs in our area, Northwest Washington in general, especially I-5 structure, which is, 80 years out of date in many cases, and off-ramps built for Model A's. Well, not Model A's, but Corvairs, maybe. And they kind of, off the record acknowledge this and say what amounts to, it's a numbers game. You don't have enough population there to get enough, attention to get moved up on the state's long list of critical needs, right, and backlog of repairs. Is there anything that you can do as a representative to wave a flag or make some commotion to get people here some relief and get us moved up on that list in some way? Or is that just part of something that's baked into the system?
I love the question, but I'm not sure if I agree that that's necessarily true. If I were working at a department, I might answer that way. But as a legislator, I would say it's our jobs to advocate for budget allocations that can allow for more of these needed functions. And I think that I have been doing that. I will continue to do that. Understanding the need. And then really it's about priorities. And it's really, if you are a Seattle legislator, fixing your roads might not be your number one priority because you have a light rail to pay for. For us, we don't have that. So we do need to get our roads back and improved and back into better shape. So I think, that's part of what we pretty consistently are up against. And I think we do a really good job advocating and we'll continue to do that. I know my seatmate, Joe Timmons, is doing a great job on the transportation committee. And I know that he's been a strong voice for this as well. So together, we're going to just keep working at it. We know this is important to our community. We do a lot of driving up here. I know I do. I spend more time in my car than I do in any of my offices.
Okay, so that follows through in a way to my other question, which is your answer about your stance on State Initiative 2117, which would repeal the Climate Commitment Act. And understanding fully the political complications of this question, I was curious in your answer, you said it's up to people, not lawmakers, to decide certain weighty topics. And you basically listed this as one of those. And I thought that was interesting, given that there has been a pretty direct and quantifiable impact from that cap and cap and invest program, quote unquote. And we ran a story in Cascadia Daily News recently saying that if that act was repealed, the state would lose $3.8 billion in revenue through 2029 for things like emissions reductions, transportation, pedestrian safety, ferry electrification, air quality improvement, renewable energy, grid modernization, and the list goes on. Salmon habitat restoration, flood relief, all of these things are now tied up in that legislation. And I'm wondering, is that something that should be decided by the public, or is that a need that's so critical that you as an elected representative should take that into account in deciding that issue instead of just handing it to the voters in the first place?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that our role is always to listen to the people of our community. And I really work hard at doing that. We have made, as a legislature, a lot of decisions to prioritize the very critical and very important investments in working toward improvements in climate change. There's no question, we don't get any easy answers here because there's no question that we have got to work toward improving the impacts and mitigating the impacts of climate change. That's true. And also, equally true, it's really difficult for people who are barely making it. I know people personally, many people personally, who are struggling with impossible decisions about paying the rent, going to work, or putting food on the table, literally. We've never seen locally the impact on our food banks that we see right now. So what is a hard conversation to have is we're in tough times. And if you aren't in tough times, be very grateful because your neighbors are. And I think it's easy to see that. So the reason that I believe that it's good to get this input from our community is because I think we did make the decisions that we did moving forward. But if we're out of step, I want to know. And if we're not, then let's keep going. I always feel that way. My office is very busy because I do take calls and emails from everybody. Please let me know. It's my number one most important job is to listen to my constituents and to represent well. So I think, anytime we can get people to engage in democracy, that's a win. And it's going to be important for us to be listening to what the people need.
So with the whole concept of cap and trade or cap and invest, do you think that we are out of state? And are you hearing that from a big share of your constituents?
I don't know, but I'm looking forward to hearing more, and I'm committed to ensuring that regardless of the outcomes of this next election or any next step, I'm always going to have that open door policy. That's exactly how I function. And my number one goal and my only goal is to represent the people of this community the way that they want me to. So I am a servant leader. That is what I do. I am here to serve.
Charlotte, you've been covering this race. I'm sure you have some questions.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about the Public Safety Caucus you've been working on with, I believe, Representative Hackney. Mm-hmm. What solutions have you developed through that work specifically on violent crime and organized retail theft?
Yeah, you can imagine that we have a lot of opinions in the legislature about what we are or are not going to do. Again, because we've landed in a place where easy answers are now off the table. So now we're at complex thinking. And when we have complex thinking, it gets a lot harder to solve problems. It's really easy to complain. It is not easy to actually delve in and solve the problem. So Representative Hackney, who is my partner, represents the Tukwila, Kent area. I represent this area, and we found that we have a lot in common, even though perhaps some might think that our districts look really different. Our crime rates are similar. We're concerned about the same things. And we believe that we need to look at addressing our public safety issues with an equity lens in mind, and especially because we know that people of color are the most impacted by policies that really aren't always working the way we need them to be. It's no secret that when we look outside, even outside the doors of this room, we see pretty consistently a public safety issue that is not being addressed the way that I feel that it needs to be addressed. So we're working hard on it. We're trying to change hearts and minds to be able to really address these things with many components in mind. I'm thinking of an example just right off the top of my head. As an employer, it was like 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, someone went to take out the trash and had an incident that threatened their safety. This is not acceptable. This place is our community, and we have to have a higher standard when it comes to public safety. People need to be able to go into the grocery store and feel safe. Children and teenagers need to be able to have the ability to walk their parks and walk to school and feel safe, and we are not there, so we need to continue to do this work. Representative Hackney and I are continually having meetings, bringing in guest speakers, presenting new information, open to ideas, bringing new folks in to try to get unstuck from this place that we have landed that feels frustrating to many.
Could you give us a sense of what some of those conversations are like, of some potential solutions? Obviously, you haven't figured it out. It's hard to figure out. But what kind of things are you all throwing around?
Well, one of the things at the center of many of our issues is fentanyl. We've never seen a problem like fentanyl. We've never seen the impact, although we've over the long term, had plenty of opportunities to learn about substance use disorder. We've never seen fentanyl before, and the opioid crisis that we have. It is complex. We know that there's a whole list of things that we need to do on the treatment side, and that is taking time. It's taking too much time. It's very frustrating. As a mental health provider myself, and a parent of a teenager, I worry about our lack of resources at really the top of my worry list. But at the same time, I feel very frustrated that I don't believe that we're dealing with the public safety portion of that. For example, if you are arrested for methamphetamines, that counts as a felony. If that substance happens to be an opioid substance like fentanyl, that is not a felony. They are not equal in the eyes of the law. And that makes no sense to me. So Representative Hackney and I worked very hard last session to try to bring this issue forward, to say, fentanyl is as deadly as it could be. Why wouldn't this be equal? And we didn't have success yet. We're going to continue to work on that. But even more so, one of the things that's important to me is, after talking to many parents, mothers, there's an informal group of mothers across Washington state whose children have died from fentanyl use. And their stories will linger forever, because it's almost unfathomable the pain that their families are going through that could have been prevented. And their frustration is my frustration. And so I often think that I'm doing work on their behalf and in memory of their children. But, you know, they explained to me that the people who sold this deadly weapon of fentanyl just walked away. They didn't get any time in prison or jail. And really all the law enforcement that I have been listening to is telling me it's a circular issue where they really don't even pause in the circulation of these drugs. So I think we ought to go after those suppliers. I think if they had a gun, we would say that's a person who has a deadly weapon. But if we put a tiny pill that looks like a piece of candy in their hand, we're letting them off scot-free. That doesn't work for me. So I think we need to continue work toward really targeting our efforts toward those who are dealing fentanyl and opioids.
Thank you. I had a question related to another initiative, Initiative 2066, and that's on natural gas. And I know that you had initially voted against House Bill, I think it's 1589, which this initiative attempts to repeal parts of. And I wanted to ask you about that vote and sort of your stance on the move away from natural gas in Washington.
So I would have to look at the actual bill numbers to be refreshed about which they were, but I can certainly speak on the issue in general. It goes back to our earlier conversation when I really have this heart for those who are struggling with finances. In order to make this move, which we need to do, off of natural gas, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do that without leaving anyone behind. And I don't think we're there yet. I'm very worried about real families in our community, many families, and also seniors who can't afford to make that move. We can't make it impossible for people to move to heat their homes and be able to afford to put food on the table. We have, this is complicated because we do need to move toward cleaner fuels. We know that. But we've got to be able to make sure that we're attending to the detail so that we slow down enough to make sure that people don't go cold in the winter, that we have the infrastructure to be able to support this change. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be serving as the environmental legislator for Washington State at the national level, at the National Council of Environmental Legislators, because I can understand what we're doing across the country with the whole picture, because of learning from my colleagues across the country. And I know that we're going to need to work rapidly with Canada and with our partners across the country to build out infrastructure. There are some things that we need to do. I am ambitious about going after them. It's very important as we look at the wildfires outside, the asthma rates of our kids. We cannot look the other way. It's not a black and white issue. Don't let anybody tell you it is. But we have to ensure that we're not leaving those who can't afford it behind.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, your opponent is very concerned about transgender girls in sports, in high school sports in particular. And I know this is also something that some of your constituents are concerned about. Last week, the Linden School Board signed a letter asking you and Representative Timmons and Senator Shoemake to review transgender athlete inclusion in high school girls' sports. I wanted to ask you what your stance is on this topic.
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that I actually don't think that this is a day-to-day crisis. I think if you talk to youth, like I do every day in my work, you'll find that they are probably better at handling these things than we are. So I really do think that we have some bigger fish to fry, frankly. I'm sorry to be direct, but that's how I feel. At the same time, I'm not worried about transgender athletes. I think that it's kind of reminiscent of when we horrifically look back into history, and we were banning people of color from pools. It's ridiculous. We look back and you go, this doesn't make any sense. I have found that in the transgender community that I have had the pleasure of getting to know, that they're as diverse as the general population. And so some people are going to want to do sports, and I would never want to stop them from doing that. This is also true for every other thing, right? So that would be, please be involved in whatever makes your heart sing. And I think that every youth and every child deserves the opportunity to do so. I think there are a lot of things we can work on. I'm always happy to look at things from an open mind, but this is not at the top of my concern list. I think that transgender youth always deserve to have protection. I mean, I think we can't finish the conversation without recognizing that they have a 50% suicide rate. I mean, are you really going to look at a kid who has a 50% suicide rate before even entering the conversation, and they tell you they want to play a sport, and you're going to say no because why? No, that doesn't work for me.
Okay. We've talked a lot about issues that are local here. There are some national issues. A lot of elections in the United States tend to become nationalized very quickly. One of the issues is abortion. And a number of states have passed legislation that would make it illegal for women to go to another state to have an abortion, and are attempting to keep track of women who do this. Washington, of course, is a state that is protective of reproductive rights. Is Washington doing enough to protect the rights of women who come here to have abortions?
We cannot take one step back, and we cannot allow for an opportunity to lose those rights. So I think that this is the issue of our time, because it's about human rights and bodily autonomy. So whether it's about abortion or other reproductive health care rights like IVF or access to birth control, this is a priority for me. This is where I feel our rights are under attack every day, and there are silent parts in our law that need to be solidified, because it seems to me that this is continually a targeted issue. And so we're going to continue to work on that. No, is there enough? No, there's not. And I happen to know that because when we saw nationally the concern about whether or not IVF rights would be protected, I looked into it in Washington State because I know how important this is to people. This is a right that really many people have accessed across the political spectrum as well. It doesn't matter Republican or Democrat. Access to IVF is really important to people. And this is a right that's under attack. So, okay, we've got to make sure that that is written in the law. This is also true for birth control. So I've got 2 pending bills on both of these issues. And I mean, when I talk about birth control, I'm talking about surgical birth control. You know, some people will talk about that like colloquial, it's known as getting your tubes tied or getting snipped or whatever you might want to call it, those kind of surgeries. I believe really strongly that when a person decides to do that, it's their choice, and they should never have to ask another person's permission. For example, having to ask a husband, or having to come back because a particular provider says, and I have heard these stories firsthand, where a provider says, oh, you're young, you'll change your mind. Once you go back home and think about it. And some of these women are saying, I absolutely know what my healthcare choices are, and I know what I want to do, and I don't want to have any kids, and this is the kind of birth control I want to access. Please don't make that decision for me. based on social factors. So I think we have to protect those rights. Really across the board, these are really basic rights, and we need to continue to make sure that we're protecting them for everybody.
Thank you.
So we can follow up on that a little bit. Your opponent, when he was here previously, talked about that issue and many other issues as being sort of put into a silo of parental rights, and was attempting to make the case that we have swung way too far, especially in Washington State, in allowing school districts, other social work organizations to basically take decisions out of the hands of parents or not notified parents. And I wonder if you have any response to that, and whether you feel whether that pendulum is in a good place today in our state.
Interesting. I think I'd have to hear a little bit more of the detail, but I just don't see that's true as a whole. I think that parents need as much support as we can offer. I think it's a hard time to parent. I say that as a parent. But I also, I run a mental health practice from the day to day, and I think that's probably one of the most frustrated places where people might bump into this. But what I have learned is that with pretty quick communication, it's not that hard. It's more of a political talking point than it is a real issue. Parental rights tends to be an umbrella term, so it's like kind of important for me to be able to understand in what context. But as a whole, I think parents have plenty of rights, and what they need is support. I think that's just me as a parent. I feel like this is a really hard time to parent. I think I'm in good company to say, how do we prepare our kids for the world that is out there? Like I said, crime is high, public safety is an issue, fentanyl is an issue. We've got kids who survived COVID, and it had an impact on a whole lot of things. We're needing to rebuild a whole lot of systems, including our education system. We're looking to build apprenticeships and all kinds of other sorts of pathways. As a parent, it's hard to keep up. So I think the real issue is parents need more support, and our students do too. But I don't really see a primary issue currently where parents are being held back from parenting. I think it's hard, but I think that parents are able to do that as much as they can. So I guess I probably need a little more context. But
do you think that's an example of what we've kind of touched on here a couple times, the national political trends that we're seeing right now across the country, of those filtering down into your district?
I do. I find it really frustrating sometimes when there are national political talking points about a thing, and we have potholes that we really do need to fix, because sometimes it can take all the air out of the room when we have practical things that we've got to take care of. But I also think that we can't lose sight of certain pieces. We've got to make sure that everything is in place. And there's nobody who cares about kids and families more than I do. This is what I've been doing for my whole life, right? This is as a social worker, since day one, I've built a career and spent all of the hours of my life building up other people's families and taking care of my own. So no easy answers, but certainly commitment to doing the work.
Okay. Let me ask you a question about shifting gears here about your political life. You've been a state legislator and introduced a lot of important legislation and made some very important changes in the way that we look at some of these issues. Interested in where you see, and you're also a mother and a working person, and I'm interested in where you see yourself on the arc of your political career right now, because given those things that you've already accomplished, you made an attempt to run for a county executive in the last election, and I wondered what your thought process was there, and how should that be seen by your constituents as commitment to your current task?
I just giggled a little bit because you said political career and you stopped me right there, because I don't think of myself as having a political career. Truly, honestly, I really look at this work as, how do I serve my community? I never expected that I would be in an elected role. I've always been a highly involved community volunteer. I like to organize people. I really just want to do good things for my community. So however that path leads me, I don't think I know any more than any of you do. We'll see. But I'm here for the work. Wherever I'm best suited to serve, I'm happy to do it there. Yeah, I mean, I think the other piece of that would be, how do you, maybe the quiet question is, how do you do all of this? And we got it down now. So I think a good calendar is really important. I follow it to the letter. And my kids are amazing, and they are resilient and strong, and they don't even know another life. So it's pretty neat to see how they have grown alongside me through a journey that none of us expected. But okay, I'll just tell you this. Yesterday, I took my teenager to the Seahawks game. And if you've been to a Seahawks game, the opening is incredible. If you haven't, I hope you get a chance to do it sometime in life, or even watching it on TV. But the crowd is roaring, and you have a huge American flag that's waving, and you start hearing the national anthem, and then there's fireworks, and then the Blue Angels fly over. And I'll tell you this, all of us were nearly in tears. My kid had, hat on heart, and he looked over at me, and I looked over at him, and I said, this is why we do what we do. And he fist bumped me, and I'll never regret it. We're doing something important for people. And I say we because they're in it with me.
A simple question here. What's your number one priority in the next session of the legislature should you be reelected?
Yeah, well, if you know me at all, you know that I will not be working on one issue. I will be working on many issues, because as a social worker, I really look at these issues as intersecting with each other. Our experiences as humans and as people who live in the 42nd district, it doesn't fit in the kind of buckets that government likes to put us in. So bodily autonomy is very important to me. Economics is very important to me. And public safety is very important to me. But don't you see how all those three things just overlap at any given moment and any given day for the people who live here? So public education, I'm going to still continue working on those bills. And, I'm going to be busy. But the reason I'm doing that is because I know that I think a lot of people in our district are fairly desperate. And they're expecting us to be at our best, so I plan to be at my best in order to be able to make as much impact as possible to ease some of this pressure off for people. It's tough right now. The concerns about how to pay the bills can take over a person's life, and I think it's happening for a lot of people. No easy answers, but we are not going to stop short of trying everything we can to look for those really complex and harder politically moving pieces so that we can address more than one thing this next session.
We talked a little bit about climate earlier, and as you know, we've had some major flooding and heat waves in this area in recent years. What's the future of farming here, and what can you do to support the local farm economy?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I think a lot about is how we have to protect our ability to grow our own food here. I work very closely with the Department of Emergency Management, which is probably incidentally, or maybe because of the flooding. So I've gotten to know them, they've gotten to know me. We've done several bills so that when and if the next flood happens or other emergency, we have a better setup than we did before. And we just continue to do that work together. But in my conversations with them, they continually remind me that we have to have preparedness for any emergency. It could even be, like they talk a lot about Cascadia, the earthquake, or other things. We are so lucky to have our food grown right here, because the whole metro Seattle area, likely in an emergency like that, is going to have significant supply chain issues from Eastern Washington. And look at what a rich resource we have here. Never mind the fact that our farming produces the most delicious food. I don't know about you, but the sweet corn right now is really hitting the spot. So we're really lucky to have all that. And I think that the way moving forward to protect that is to continue to work with all stakeholders together. And that's really the way forward with every issue, but it's certainly true here as well, that we can't make policy without input from all the parties. And I think that's where my strength is, and I think that's really why I do the work that I do, is because I think I'm fairly adept at bringing people together, even when it seems impossible.
I have a quick follow-up to that. You mentioned all the stakeholders, and that put in my mind water rights and the current adjudication process that's going on. Mm-hmm. Some of the farming organizations in Whatcom County specifically have seemed to still be struggling with this issue and have basically suggested that the state pull back from the adjudication issue and let them try to work this out amongst themselves. How do you feel about that request at this stage of that process?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that they're still struggling. Of course, we're still struggling. This is a really complex issue, and it's not going to be solved overnight. So that's not surprising that it would be complex, and we'll continue working through it as we go. I think the legal processes are moving as they are, but that doesn't mean the solution to the complex nature of all water rights has been met, and I don't think any of those stakeholders believe that that's true. I think we all know that we have work ahead.
Thanks.
Charlotte, anything else?
Nope.
Well, we talked a lot about issues today, but people vote for candidates for reasons other than issues. They want to know who the candidate is. And one of the questions I always have for a candidate is, how did you get where you are? Are there people who have inspired you? Who are your heroes and heroines?
Yeah, of course. How did I get where I am? On the backs of a lot of really strong women mostly, but also a couple of really good men, including my dad. I am very grateful to have grown up with a strong family. And I'm very grateful that many of my social work mentors, and I think even matriarchs in the profession, have been mentors to me for many years and now going into decades. I'm very grateful for that kind of support. People who started me out when I was 19, 20 years old and still continue to consult with me today. I'm grateful for their support. I think that it makes the difference between me and any other candidate and any other role. Is there's no way to peel away from the fact that I'm a mother, I'm a social worker, and at the core of everything I do is a true caring for my community. That's why I do what I do. I don't know where that leads, but we're going to keep doing it.
Well, you've answered our questions today. Is there anything else you'd like this board to know about why this board should endorse you? Anything else you'd like to know? Anything else you'd like to say to convince people to vote for you?
I don't think I have much to add. There's many facets to being a citizen here in the 42nd District. It's not lost upon me that it's helpful that I grew up here. I understand this community in many complex ways. I'm also a business owner here. I call myself an accidental business owner because I didn't think that would be in the plans as a social worker. But it turns out all of those decisions and the pressures of really taking care of employees and signing a paycheck every 2 weeks for those folks are something that I share with other business owners in the community. I'm a mother and a community member and a daughter. And all of those things make me, I think, really what I would say is a representative elected. And I'm here to represent the people who live here and all their complexities. And I'm ready to do that in a way that's going to make people's lives better to the best of my ability.
All right, thank you. Really appreciate you joining us today. Democracy won't work if people aren't willing to run for offices, and I know there's a lot of sacrifices involved in running for office. It also won't work without an aggressive an aggressive press to ask you questions. So we
That's
really
right.
appreciate your joining us, and thanks again.
And thanks again for having me. I agree.